Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving headfirst into the incredibly fascinating world of emotional intelligence. We're going to unpack exactly how our feelings actually work, why they sometimes feel totally overwhelming, and, most importantly, how we can master them to live a much better, more successful life. Let's get right into it.
For centuries, going all the way back to ancient thinkers like Plato, society largely believed that humans were just held back by their emotions. You know the exact feeling I'm talking about, right? A quick, regrettable burst of anger where you say something you definitely don't mean, or a deep sadness that just makes you want to hide under the covers. For the longest time, elites believed these moments were absolute proof that a person would be way better off without any feelings at all. They literally viewed us as being slaves to our emotions.
But thankfully, this paradigm shifted dramatically over time. Aristotle actually started the conversation early on by defining emotions as feelings that affect our judgments. But the real turning point? That happened in the 1950s with Abraham Maslow's human potential movement. That's when we started viewing human emotion as a strength rather than a weakness. Then, jumping to the 1990s, researchers Peter Salovey and John Mayer officially published work proving that emotion is a scientifically testable intelligence. And by 1995, Daniel Goleman popularized the concept we all know and use today: emotional intelligence. It completely flipped the script. Emotion went from being this terrible limitation to a measurable, highly testable skill.
So to truly understand this intelligence, we first have to decode what an emotion actually is. Based on the source material, we can break it down into three distinct parts. Basically, an emotion is a spontaneous feeling made up of, first, physiological arousal, which just means your body physically reacts, like, say, an increased heart rate. Second is expressive behavior, so your verbal or physical reaction. And third is a conscious experience, which is your actual awareness of what is happening around you in that moment.
What's really fascinating here is that we actually experience these emotions in waves, and it all starts with primary emotions. These are your instinctive, totally automatic reactions. Think about walking down the street with a friend and suddenly a reckless cyclist almost hits them. Your primary, instantaneous emotion is fear for their safety. But that fear is fleeting. It vanishes almost instantly and gets replaced by a secondary emotion, which is basically a reactive offshoot. So that initial split second of fear rapidly morphs into intense anger toward that reckless cyclist. The crucial takeaway here is that we actually need these core emotions to categorize our human experiences. Without fear, we wouldn't know when to trigger our fight or flight response to avoid danger, right? Without sadness, we wouldn't be able to process the profound impact of a loss. And without joy, we wouldn't know what brings us pleasure and satisfaction. Emotions are, essentially, our internal compass. Without this broad spectrum of feelings, we'd have no way to tell what kinds of experiences we want to actively seek out in life and which ones we need to steer clear of.
And that brings us to the ultimate toolkit for managing all these feelings. The source material identifies 5 core pillars of emotional intelligence. We're going to walk through each of these right now, starting with the inner self and then moving outward to how we connect with the rest of the world. Because mastering these 5 elements, that is the absolute key to unlocking your EQ.
So let's start with Pillar 1, self-awareness. This is all about knowing your internal standards and your unique self. Psychologist Daniel Goleman defines self-awareness as knowing one's internal states, preferences, resources, and intuitions. It's really the foundational building block of this whole thing. To test yours, ask yourself this kind of crazy question. If you lived with an exact replica of yourself for a day, would you actually recognize how you think? Would you spot your own physical responses or the types of judgments you make? True self-awareness requires intense self-focus. It means constantly comparing our daily actions and thoughts against our own internal standards to figure out where the disparities are. That way, we can continuously improve.
Moving right along, Pillar 2 is self-regulation. This means managing your impulses to produce desired results.
Self-regulation is the active choice to positively manage your reactions as impulses hit you. It allows you to decide which emotional response is actually best suited for an experience rather than just flying off the handle on autopilot. The source text has this great comparison. It likens it to adding salt to food. You obviously can't add the same amount of salt to 1 plate of food as you would to, say, 5 plates. If you respond to every single situation in life with the exact same emotional intensity, your life becomes either way too salty with massive overreactions to minor stuff, or entirely too bland with underreactions to things that actually matter. You've got to measure your response.
But you do have to be careful here, because self-regulation draws from a limited pool of mental energy. Researcher Roy Baumeister actually called the draining of this energy ego depletion. Think about it. If you've been heavily managing your impulses all day long at work, your mental energy gets totally zapped. And when you hit this state of ego depletion, you are so much more prone to sudden emotional outbursts or even mental breakdowns. So you really have to protect your mental energy.
All right, on to the third pillar, motivation. This is the drive and energy that activates goal-driven behavior.
Motivation is literally the engine of human behavior, and this drive is typically split into two distinct categories. First up, we have intrinsic motivation. This is doing something because of an internal belief, personal gratification, or honestly, just because you think it's fun. Then, on the flip side, we have extrinsic motivation, where your fuel is an external reward. You're chasing a paycheck, a bonus, a trophy, or maybe social status. We usually use a mix of both, but knowing exactly what is fueling your engine at any given time is a huge part of emotional intelligence.
To understand motivation on a deeper level, we can look at Abraham Maslow's famous hierarchy of needs. Maslow showed that human motivation actually moves in steps. We are completely driven to fulfill our most basic physiological needs at step 1, like food and shelter, before we even begin to care about safety. And we need safety before we can seek out love and belonging. After all, it's pretty hard to worry about achieving your full potential if you desperately need to use the bathroom, right? Basically, your unmet needs are always your primary motivators.
Now we're going to shift to the outer core of EQ with the fourth pillar, empathy. This is all about understanding the experiences of others. Empathy is simply the capacity to put yourself in someone else's shoes. But research actually breaks it down into 3 distinct types. The first is emotional empathy, which is sometimes called affective empathy. Daniel Goleman describes this as feeling physically along with the other person, almost as if their emotions were a contagious virus. If they're stressed out, your heart rate goes up. If they're weeping, you suddenly feel that lump in your throat. It is a completely spontaneous, shared physical reaction.
The second type is cognitive empathy. Now, this one is entirely intellectual perspective taking. It allows you to understand exactly why someone feels the way they do without necessarily catching the emotion yourself. For instance, you can cognitively understand why a business owner is crying over a lost investment, and you can communicate your understanding of that logic perfectly without actually bursting into tears yourself.
And the final type is compassionate empathy, also known as empathetic concern. This right here is the gold standard. It combines understanding their predicament and feeling with the person, but it adds a crucial third element, a spontaneous drive to actually take action. You don't just feel their pain, you're moved to step in and help them fix it.
Finally, that brings us to Pillar 5, social skills. These are the specific skills that foster interpersonal relations.
Here's the thing. You can have all the self-awareness and empathy in the world, but if you don't have essential social skills, your EQ just remains trapped inside your own head. We're talking about things like speaking clearly, giving constructive criticism without coming off as attacking, and managing disagreements. Notice that active listening and actually apologizing when you're wrong are essential tools, right alongside conflict management. You need these to navigate communities and interact with vastly different personality types. So, when we bring it all together, the self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills, we completely transform our emotions. They're no longer those overwhelming liabilities that Plato warned us about centuries ago. Instead, they become a highly calibrated, finely tuned toolkit for your personal and professional success.
As you reflect on the anatomy of your own emotions and the ways you interact with the world around you, I want you to ask yourself this one crucial question. Which of these 5 pillars in your EQ toolkit needs the most sharpening today? Are you really aware of your internal standards, or do you maybe need to work on your self-regulation so your life isn't quite as salty as that over-seasoned food we talked about earlier? Dive in, assess yourself, and start building that intelligence.